Hi everyone, it's Mr. Miles. This is the video for Monday, okay, March the 27th. And if you haven't already, stop this video and go back and watch the week 11 explainer video that gives you the overview of the week as a whole, okay? So watch that video first and then you can come watch this video, all right? So this video, I'm going to give you an overview of what to do on Monday, March 27th, while I'm not here. What you're going to get is a couple things. So first off, you'll get this little kenning worksheet. This kenning worksheet is basically an overview of what kennings are. Okay, it's super simple. All right, a kenning is essentially you taking a common word like a phone, and you, rather than saying phone, coming up with a poetic kind of two-word metaphor for it. Okay, so rather than phone, I might say voice box or something, or um, conversation box, or can't really come up with these off the fly, but you know what I mean. So that's kind of Gatorade, energy juice, right? That's a good kenning. So kenning is basically you just taking a common word and taking a common word and turning it into a two-word metaphor. Okay, it's always figurative. It's never meant to be taken literally. Okay, and so like the common ones that the uh, Anglo-Saxons would use would be ones like the whale road, right? Obviously, the whales don't have a literal road, but what is the place where the whales constantly travel? The ocean. The sun was the sky candle. Okay, well, obviously, the sun's not a literal candle, but it lights the whole world in the sky, right? So obviously, it's a sky candle. A king was known as a ring giver, okay, because if you honored yourself in combat, if you showed your prowess in combat, the king would honor you by giving rings to you. Okay, so instead of a king, I would call him a ring giver. Okay, and so these are just common ways that Anglo Saxons would incorporate poetry in their daily life. Okay, as a kenning. All right, and so what this worksheet is designed to do is to hopefully let you practice using some kennings, because we still use them today. We just don't necessarily call them that. All right, and so activity one, you basically just explain what you think each of these are. Okay, so pause this video, take a minute, and try to tell me what you think each of these are. Okay. Then, once you've done that, go ahead and knock out activity two. Activity two is everyday people, everyday words. And I want you to try to come up with a kenning of your own, like I just tried, and maybe not failed to do with these items. Okay. So pause the video, take your time, do the first page of the worksheet before you flip it over, and then we'll talk about it. So pause. Okay. Um, so activity one. So gas guzzler, obviously a gas guzzler. We use that to refer to a car, cancer stick, cigarette, muffin top. That's somebody who's got little girth over their belt, kind of spills over. So a husky person would be a muffin top. Couch potato is a lazy person. Landline, we don't really have those anymore, but I mean, it's a telephone. Okay. Eye candy is a really attractive person. Eye candy. Right. So that's activity one. Okay. We use kennings like that all the time. We just don't call them that anymore. Activity two. So here you were supposed to come up with kennings of your own for these people. So, for example, teacher, you might say knowledge giver, or you might say student shepherd or something. I don't know. But, things like that. Okay. So you kind of have free reign on how you come up with your own kennings there. All right. And then we skip ahead to activity four. Don't ask me why it goes from activity two to four. Just go with it. And so here you have some real Anglo-Saxon kennings from Beowulf. And based off kind of the conversation we just had, I want you to try to figure out what they mean. Okay. Some of them might mean the same thing. So, you might use one more than once. But try to figure out what these Anglo-Saxon kennings mean. Okay. So I'll pause. and you do it. Okay. All right. So looking at the actual kennings themselves. All right. So dread of the land. Okay. Well, we haven't met him yet, but that's going to refer to Grendel. Okay. Grendel is the first antagonist of the poem. He's the first bad guy Beowulf has to fight. Okay. The war gleam. Well, what is something shiny that you see often in war? Okay. Well, it can refer to either armor, shiny armor, or the sword that you brandish around. Okay. Obviously, the wave floater is going to be something that floats on the waves, like a boat. The blood gusher. Well, what causes blood to gush? Yeah, the swords do. Sails bath. It's obviously referring to the ocean. Um, Sail is just a. I'm not entirely sure who Sail is. It might be like an Anglo-Saxon, like minor deity or something like that at the sea. Sky candle. We talked about it. The sun. Heaven's fire. Same concept. The sun. Battle sweat. Okay, so is it actual sweat that you get from a battle, or is it an also a particular kind of bodily fluid that happens when you die, like blood, right? So talking about blood. Whale roads, the ocean, the raven feeder. Okay. This actually refers to two possible things throughout the poem. It can refer to Grendel specifically because he kills people and their bodies feed the ravens. It can also just refer generally to a sword, right? A sword kills people, the dead bodies feed the ravens. Okay. Um, the human killer, I mean, think about what kills people. A sword does. Uh, bone crusher. Okay. So this one can refer to, again, either Grendel specifically, or it can refer to a shield because Anglo-Saxon warriors would bash people with their shield. And obviously, if you got bashed in the face with that big metal boss in the center of the shield, you probably break some bones in your face. And then the last one is the sword sleep. Well, if a sword puts you to sleep, are you ever going to wake up? Probably not. So that's called death. That's what that stands for. Okay. So those are kennings. It's not that complicated. It's just something that, I'm going to want you to try to figure out, okay, when you look for kennings and when you read the text, try to spot them, okay, as they show up and be like, oh, yeah, that's what that is, right? Because the Anglo-Saxons love their poetry. They love really two things more than anything else. The Anglo-Saxons love kennings. So they love to not just say the thing they're talking about. Of course, it would be too simple, but they want to use kennings to describe it. But they also want to use alliteration. And so you'll see a lot of alliteration depending on the translation that you read. I don't think the Purple Book uses too much alliteration. I think that one, for some reason, they don't translate the alliteration as much, but either way. So that's kind of the gist of the Anglo-Saxon poetry piece of it in terms of just the form of the poetry. Okay. Now, let's talk about the poem itself. Okay. So for Monday, all right, you are going to read basically pages 33 through 44. So starting with Grendel and going up until the end of Beowulf's battle with Grendel. Okay, so stop when you see Grendel's mother. Okay. Um, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of start you off with the Grendel section. And then what I want you to do is I want you to continue reading on your own. It's pretty straightforward what happens after this. But I want you to kind of get a feel for what happens in the poem, kind of the setting and the situation. And so we're going to kind of dive into this real quick. So, what do we have to know about Beowulf before we start the poem? Well, essentially, this is all the context we really need. Okay, this kind of little italics stuff right here. So, essentially, there's a king named King Hrothgar. Okay, and King Hrothgar is a big, rich, awesome, powerful king of Denmark. Okay, the Danes. And because he's so rich, he built this enormous mead hall. Okay, and remember, the mead hall is like this really giant wooden building where the king lives. You have like basically city council meetings where you discuss problems going on in the community. You drink there, you party there, you have fun there, you hang out with your friends there. It's the centerpiece of the community. Okay, and so you got King Hrothgar. He builds the biggest mead hall, and it's called Herat. Okay, and so I will kind of think of a comparison like the new school building that we're sitting in right now. Okay, so like we spent all this money, built this brand spanking new school building, right? And all that comes out of the mead hall, just like all the sounds that come out of this school building we're in, are the sounds of joy and happiness, right? Because everyone's happy to be in the school building, right? Everyone's happy to be in this mead hall, right? Well, somebody doesn't like the sounds of happiness and joy. And that is a person named Grendel, who is not really a person. He's more of a monster. Do we know what kind of monster? Sort of, but not exactly. He's never physically described. So we kind of leave that up to your imagination. But that's essentially what's going on with Grendel, okay? He has this brand spanking new mead hall that King Hrothgar built, and everyone's happy. They're partying, they're singing, they're, being really happy and joyous. And Grendel, who was this monster and is evil, he just can't stand the fact that people are having fun. And so he wants to go kill them all and make them not have fun anymore. And so that's essentially the gist of it, okay? And so now let's start reading and kind of pick apart the section where Grendel's introduced. A powerful monster, living down in the darkness, growled in pain, impatient as day after day the music rang loud in the hall, the harp's rejoicing call and the poet's clear song sung the ancient beginnings of us all, recalling the Almighty, making the earth, shaping the beautiful plains marked by oceans, and proudly setting the sun and moon to glow across the land and light it. So, not only are Hrothgar's people in the mead hall that he built in Herat, are they being happy and singing, but they're singing songs about the Almighty, who is God, the Christian God. And remember, we talked about how this was a pagan poem that was Christianized because it was written down by Christian monks. Well, the Christian monks here are inserting it, and they're saying, like, well, hey, the reason Grendel's mad is not just because people are partying and having a great time. It's because they're singing songs about Jesus while doing it. And that makes that monster who was so evil even madder because they're singing about Jesus. Okay? And the corners of the earth were made lovely with trees and leaves, and made quick with life, and each of the nations who now move on its face, and then as now its warriors sang for their pleasure. So Hrothgar's men lived happy in his hall, till the monster stirred, that demon, that fiend, Grendel, who haunted the moors, the wild marshes, and made his home in a hell, not hell but earth. He was spawned in that slime, conceived by a pair of monsters born of Cain, murderous creatures banished by God, punished forever for the crime of Abel's death. The Almighty drove out these demons, and their exile was bitter, shut away from men. They split into 1,000 forms of evil, spirits, fiends, goblins, monsters, giants, a brood, forever opposing the Lord's will, again and again defeated. So here we get a little bit of Grendel's backstory. And Grendel's backstory is not just he's a monster. Yes, he's a monster, but where does he come from? Well, if you trace back his genealogy, where does he come from? Grendel goes all the way back to Cain. And Cain, if you don't know, is a character in the book of Genesis. He's the first murderer. He kills his brother Abel. Okay? And so after Cain kills Abel, he's cursed by God. And so according to this poem, Cain, after he was cursed by God, gave birth to a race of monsters and demons and fiends and ghosts. And Grendel is descended from all of those wicked creatures, okay, that can trace their way back to Cain. And so not only is he a monster, he's cursed by God, okay? So again, you've got that Christian element here of he's cursed. God hates him. And because God hates him, he hates all of God's people, okay? And so that turns him into a monster. But then when darkness had dropped, Grendel went up to Herat, wondering what the warriors would do in that hall when the drinking was done. Well, obviously, what do you think is going to happen when everybody just gets absolutely blasted drunk? They're going to pass out. He found them sprawled in sleep, suspecting nothing, their dreams undisturbed. The monster's thoughts were as quick as his greed or his claws. He slipped through the door, and there in the silence snatched up 30 men, smashed them, unknowing in their beds, and ran out with their bodies. the blood dripping behind them, back to his lair, delighted with his night's slaughter. At daybreak, when sun's first light, they saw how well he'd worked, and that gray morning broke their long feast with tears and laments for the dead. Hrothgar, their lord, sat joyless in Heorot, a mighty prince mourning the fate of his lost friends and companions, knowing by its tracks some demon had torn his followers apart. He wept, fearing the beginning might not be the end. And that night, Grendel came again, so set on murder, no crime could ever be enough, no savage assault quench his lust for evil. Then each warrior tried to escape him and search for rest in different beds, as far from Heorot as they could find. Seeing how Grendel hunted when they slept, distance was safety. The only survivors were those who fled them. And so, hate had triumphed. So Grendel ruled and fought with the righteous, one against many, and won. And so Heorot stood empty and stayed deserted for years, 12 winters of grief. For Hrothgar, king of the Danes, sorrow heaped at his door by hell-forged hands. And so, you've got this brand new building. Hrothgar spent all of his money to build it. He wants it to be the best and the brightest and the biggest mead hall ever. And he can't enjoy it because every night Grendel comes and kills and attacks and slaughters people. And now the warriors are doing what anybody else would do, which is leaving. They're like, bye, Hrothgar, sorry. Have fun with your mead hall that you can't use. And so this brand new building stays empty for 12 years. So I want you to, again, think back to this new building behind me that I'm sitting in. Like, imagine we spent all that money. We built this brand new building. And then, like, a giant monster comes and starts killing people left and right. And it just stays empty for 12 years. This brand new building, unable to be used. Because if you try to use it, you die. And so Hrothgar obviously is in distress. Okay. And I'm going to kind of stop here in terms of just the reading it out loud. Okay. Hrothgar is in distress. And so what Hrothgar does is he sends out basically a blast on the radio, the figurative radio. They didn't have radios back then, but he basically sends out a blast. All the messengers going to scatter them out. He's basically going to say, like, can anybody who is a brave, noble warrior come save me from this creature? I need rescue from Grendel. And most warriors are going to get this message and they're going to be like, no way, man. I ain't risking my life. And then you're going to get Beowulf. Okay. And Beowulf is going to make his appearance. And Beowulf is going to sail to Denmark from Geatland, which is in modern day Sweden, with all of his warriors. And he is going to be the one to fight Grendel and prove his worth as a warrior. Okay. And so the rest of these sections, okay, that you're reading today, you've got Beowulf. Obviously, this is the introduction of Beowulf as a character. And so Beowulf shows up from the sea. He talks with a coast guard who's like, who are you? And he's like, you don't know who I am? I'm Beowulf, man. I'm awesome, right? And he basically does a couple epic boasts to show how awesome he is. And he talks to Hrothgar, and Hrothgar tells him the situation. And so Beowulf does some more bragging. And then he tells Hrothgar, importantly, I'm going to fight Grendel with no sword and no armor. I'm going to fight him with my bare hands, and I'm going to win. And partially he does this out of pride because he knows that he can defeat Grendel with his bare hands, but he also does it out of a sense of fair play. Okay, so like he knows that Grendel doesn't use armor or a sword. He just uses his bare hands. So Beowulf is like, well, it's only fair if I use my bare hands to fight Grendel. And I'm not going to use any armor because Grendel doesn't wear any. So it's only fair that we just kind of level the playing field here. It would be like, if the other football team had AK-47s. Well, okay, we don't have AK-47s. We're kind of at a disadvantage. So, put the AK-47s down and, let's just have a good, clean football game. Okay. And so Beowulf's going to fight Grendel barehanded, no armor. Okay. According to the version that you read, some people say that he's, wearing like a loincloth. Some versions say he's just butt naked. The movie, he's butt naked. So he's just going to fight Grendel on his own. All right. And so this is supposed to show us that Beowulf yes, he's full of pride, he's cocksure, he's incredibly arrogant in a way, but he's arrogant in a way that can back it up. And he's going to prove it that he can back it up because he has the charisma and he has uh, the fortitude to be able to go hand to hand, toe to toe with this monster from hell and defeat it. Okay. And so then he goes to this section, which is the battle with Grendel himself. Okay. And essentially, Beowulf and Grendel, they tussle, they fight, they wrestle with one another. Beowulf pretends to be sleeping, and all of his men, all of his other warriors, pretend to be sleeping alongside him. He lets Grendel sneak up and grab one of the guys and eat him so Beowulf can kind of see what's going on. And then he ambushes him, jumps him. And the entire time, after Grendel realizes how strong Beowulf is, Grendel decides, I'm out of here. And he tries to leave until Beowulf takes his arm and through sheer strength just rips off Grendel's arm. Okay. And obviously, if I rip your arm out of the socket, that's a mortal wound. You're not coming back from that. You're bleeding out in a few minutes. Um, and that's what happens to Grendel. Beowulf rips his arm out of his socket and kills him. Okay. So read these sections kind of again. Now you know the gist of what happens. Read the sections, look for the language, look for the kennings, look for the ways that he describes it. Um, both the monster Grendel and the warrior Beowulf, not just through their deeds or their words, but also their deeds. So, like, what do they do? What that shows us they are monstrous or spawn of Satan or noble and courageous. Okay. And yes, I'm aware that the light went off because I've just been sitting here at my desk. So, but that's it for Monday. If you have any questions, let me know. Shoot me a remind, and I'll be happy to respond to it. Okay. Um, and don't forget, each day you have a question. The one for this day is pretty straightforward. How is Grendel described? How is Beowulf described? Pick 4 things the text says about both of them and use your text evidence. Okay. So that's it for Monday.